My name is Brianna, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm standing in what used to be my backyard paradise, covered in mud from head to toe, gripping a sledgehammer in my trembling hands. 6 months ago, I had invested $50,000 of my inheritance into creating the most beautiful koi pond in our neighborhood. Behind me lies the destroyed remains of custom filtration systems, broken stone bridges, and uprooted Japanese maples. The Yamamoto family just pulled into our driveway for their scheduled property tour, and my parents are about to discover that their secret sale just became their worst nightmare. Before we dive into the story of betrayal and revenge, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for some serious family drama. Make sure to subscribe because, trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. Let me start from the beginning so you understand exactly what my parents tried to steal from me. I'm Brianna Rodriguez, 28 years old, and I work as a landscape designer here in Sacramento, California. 6 months ago, my world changed when my beloved grandmother passed away and left me $75,000 in her will. Grandma Rosa had always believed in following your dreams, and she specifically wrote in her will that this money should be used for something that would bring me lasting joy. At the time, I was living with my parents, Margaret and Ronald, in our family home while I transitioned between jobs. They're both in their 50s, and I thought staying with them temporarily would help us all save money. What I didn't realize was that they were already plotting to use my presence as an excuse to claim ownership over everything I built. The house had always felt ordinary, with a bland backyard that consisted of nothing more than dying grass and a few struggling rose bushes that my mother had given up on years ago. After Grandma's funeral, I spent weeks planning the perfect way to honor her memory. She had always loved Japanese culture and had taught me about the principles of Zen gardening during my childhood visits. That's when the vision hit me. I would transform our boring backyard into an authentic Japanese koi garden that would serve as a living memorial to her wisdom and love. I spent 3 months researching every detail, from the specific types of stones used in traditional Japanese water features to the proper pH levels needed for different koi varieties. The project was massive and required hiring several specialists. First came the excavation team, who dug a kidney-shaped pond that measured 20 feet by 30 feet with varying depths from 2 to 4 feet. Then I brought in a master pond builder named Mike Chen, whose family had been creating water gardens for 3 generations. Mike helped me install a state-of-the-art filtration system that included UV sterilizers, biological filters, and a skimmer that would keep the water crystal clear year-round. The filtration system alone cost $12,000, but I knew Grandma would have approved because she always said quality was worth the investment. Next came the hardscaping, which was where the real artistry began. I had authentic river rocks shipped in from Oregon, each one hand-selected for its color and texture. The centerpiece was a traditional arched bridge made from reclaimed teak that I found at an architectural salvage yard. The bridge cost $4,000, but when I stood on it and looked down at the emerging pond below, I knew it was perfect. Around the pond's perimeter, I planted Japanese maples, ornamental grasses, and carefully positioned boulders to create natural-looking outcroppings. The waterfall feature was perhaps the most complex element. Mike helped me design a 3-tiered cascade that would provide both visual beauty and necessary water circulation. We built it into a hillside that we created using the excavated dirt, then covered it with carefully arranged stones and planted it with moss and small ferns to make it look like it had been there for decades. The sound of water flowing over the rocks was so peaceful that I started spending my morning coffee time sitting beside it. But the real stars of the pond were the koi themselves. I purchased 15 fish from a specialized breeder in Los Angeles, driving down myself to select each one individually. There was a massive kohaku with brilliant red and white markings that I named Akira, a stunning black and gold kiyutsuri called Yuki, and a pure white platinum ogon that seemed to glow underwater. The koi alone cost $15,000, but watching them glide through their new home made every penny worth it. My parents' reaction during the construction was what I thought was genuine enthusiasm. My mother would bring lemonade to the workers and comment on how beautiful everything was becoming. "Oh, honey, what a wonderful way to honor Grandma's memory," she would say while patting my shoulder. My father seemed impressed by the technical aspects, often asking detailed questions about the filtration system and the electrical work required for the pumps and lights. The project took 4 months to complete, and I supervised every single detail personally. I was there when they poured the concrete for the pond liner, when they installed each piece of the filtration system, and when they placed every single stone around the waterfall. This wasn't just a home improvement project, it was my sanctuary, my therapy, after losing the most important person in my life. Working in the garden became my way of processing grief while creating something beautiful that would honor Grandma's memory for years to come. When everything was finished, the transformation was breathtaking. The local Home and Garden magazine featured our backyard in their spring issue, calling it a masterpiece of tranquil design that transports visitors to a peaceful Japanese retreat. Neighbors started asking for tours, and I happily showed them around, explaining the symbolism behind different elements and sharing stories about Grandma's love for Japanese culture. But looking back now, I realized that my parents' interest in the project wasn't about supporting my dreams. They kept asking specific questions about property value increases and how much the installation had cost. At the time, I thought they were just being practical parents, concerned about their daughter's financial decisions. I had no idea they were already calculating how much money they could make by selling my creation out from under me. The first sign that something was wrong came about 2 months after the pond was completed. I started noticing strange behavior from my parents that I initially dismissed as empty nest syndrome or general restlessness. They would be having conversations in hushed tones that would immediately stop the moment I entered the room. When I asked what they were discussing, they would give vague answers about retirement planning or future considerations that felt oddly evasive. The first concrete evidence of their deception came when I was looking for a stapler in my father's home office and discovered a stack of real estate brochures hidden underneath some old tax documents. These weren't general retirement community flyers, they were detailed market analyses for our specific neighborhood, complete with recent sale prices and property value assessments. When I confronted my parents about the brochures during dinner that evening, they exchanged a quick glance before my mother smoothly explained that they were just exploring options for their golden years. "We're not getting any younger, sweetheart," my father added with what seemed like genuine concern. "We want to make sure we're prepared for retirement and understand what our options might be." Their explanations seemed reasonable enough, and I felt guilty for being suspicious of parents who were simply planning for their future. I apologized for snooping and told them I supported whatever decisions would make them happy in retirement. But the strange behavior continued and actually intensified over the following weeks. I would come home from work to find my parents quickly ending phone calls or closing laptop screens when I entered the room. When I asked who they had been talking to, the answers were always vague mentions of financial advisors or old friends. The gaslighting began subtly, with comments about how I was becoming paranoid or reading too much into normal conversations. The second major discovery happened completely by accident. I had come home early from a client meeting that had been canceled, and as I approached the front door, I could hear my father's voice through the window, having what was clearly a business conversation. I stood outside and listened as he discussed maximizing property value and timing the market correctly with someone who was obviously a real estate professional. When I entered the house, my father quickly ended the call and claimed he had been talking to his cousin about his cousin's house sale. That evening, I confronted both parents directly about what I had overheard. My mother's response was a masterclass in manipulation. She sat me down at the kitchen table, took my hands in hers, and spoke in the gentle voice she had used when I was a child. "Brianna, honey, we just want to secure our future. You understand that, don't you? We've worked our whole lives, and we need to make smart decisions about our retirement. Your beautiful pond has increased our property value significantly, and we want to understand what that means for our financial security." Her explanation made sense on the surface, but something about the way they had been hiding these conversations felt wrong. Why would they be secretive about getting property appraisals if this was just about retirement planning? I tried to push down my growing suspicions and told myself that I was being unreasonable. These were my parents, the people who had raised me and supported me through college and career changes. Surely they wouldn't do anything to harm me. However, my intuition kept nagging at me, so I made a decision that would later prove crucial to protecting myself. I installed a security camera system in the common areas of the house, including the living room and kitchen. I was legally allowed to do this, since I was listed as a co-owner on the property deed, something my grandmother had insisted on when she helped my parents buy the house years earlier. I told my parents about the cameras, claiming they were for general security purposes after some recent break-ins in the neighborhood. The cameras revealed the truth within just a few days. While I was at work, my parents had been giving private tours of our backyard to well-dressed strangers who were obviously potential buyers. I watched the footage of my mother proudly showing off the koi pond, explaining the features and benefits as if she had designed and paid for everything herself. When I confronted them about these secret tours, they claimed these were just friends who had heard about the pond and wanted to see it for themselves. "We're so proud of your beautiful work, sweetheart," my father said with a smile that I was beginning to recognize as completely fake. "We just wanted to show off what our talented daughter created. Is that such a crime?" But the people in the footage didn't look like casual friends admiring a garden. They were taking measurements, asking detailed questions about maintenance costs, and clearly evaluating the property with the eyes of potential purchasers. The lies were escalating, and my anxiety was mounting with each passing day. I started having trouble sleeping, wondering what other secrets my parents might be hiding. The home that had always been my safe haven was beginning to feel like a trap, and the pond that was supposed to be my peaceful sanctuary was becoming a source of stress and worry. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. 3 weeks after discovering the secret tours, I made a discovery that shattered any remaining trust I had in my parents. I was researching comparable properties in our area for a client's project when I decided to check recent listings in our own neighborhood. That's when I saw it. Our family home was listed for sale on multiple real estate websites, complete with professional photos that prominently featured my koi pond as the main selling point. The listing described the property as having a stunning Japanese-inspired water garden with premium koi collection, professionally designed and installed, adding significant value to this exceptional family home. The asking price was $450,000, which was nearly $100,000 more than similar homes in our area. My pond wasn't just being used to sell the house, it was the primary reason for the inflated price. I immediately called the listing agent, Sandra Kowalski, whose contact information was prominently displayed on the website. When I identified myself as Brianna Rodriguez and explained that I lived in the house being sold, Sandra's response revealed the depth of my parents' deception. "Oh yes, Brianna, your parents told me all about you. They mentioned you were traveling overseas for work and had given them power of attorney to handle the sale while you were away." The conversation with Sandra uncovered a sophisticated fraud scheme that my parents had been developing for months. They had forged my signature on the listing agreement and had somehow produced official-looking documents claiming I had granted them legal authority to act on my behalf. Sandra showed me copies of these documents when I demanded to see them, and I was horrified to discover that my signature had been perfectly replicated on multiple legal forms. I immediately hired an attorney, Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in real estate fraud and family law. Jennifer's investigation revealed that my parents had been researching legal loopholes for months, looking for ways to sell property without requiring consent from all owners. They had discovered that if they could prove I was mentally incapacitated or unable to make sound financial decisions, they could potentially gain legal guardianship and sell the property without my permission. The forged documents were just the beginning of their elaborate scheme. Jennifer's investigation uncovered a fake psychiatric evaluation that claimed I was suffering from severe depression and financial irresponsibility following my grandmother's death. This evaluation was supposedly conducted by Dr. Harrison Wells, a psychiatrist who, according to the document, had been treating me for 6 months. The problem was, I had never met Dr. Harrison Wells, and when Jennifer tried to contact him, she discovered that no such licensed psychiatrist existed in California. During our second meeting, Jennifer laid out the full scope of what my parents had planned. "Brianna, this isn't just about selling the house," she explained while spreading the fraudulent documents across her conference table. "They've created an entire false narrative about your mental health and financial competence. If their plan had succeeded, they wouldn't just have sold your home, they would have gained legal control over your entire inheritance and potentially had you committed to a psychiatric facility." The next family meeting was a disaster that opened my eyes to how deep the conspiracy went. My parents had called for a discussion about our future and had invited my Uncle Curtis to serve as a neutral mediator. Uncle Curtis had always been my father's closest friend, and I had trusted him since childhood. But during this meeting, Curtis revealed himself as a co-conspirator when he immediately began supporting my parents' narrative about my supposed mental instability. "Bree, honey, your parents are worried about you," Uncle Curtis said in a condescending tone. I had never heard from him before. "The pond is beautiful, but spending $50,000 on fish seems like a cry for help. Maybe it's time to consider that you're not thinking clearly since your grandmother's death." The betrayal cut deep because Uncle Curtis had been at Grandma's funeral, had comforted me during my grief, and had seemed supportive of my pond project when it was being built. The meeting deteriorated quickly when I presented the evidence of their fraudulent documents and secret property listing. Instead of apologizing or admitting wrongdoing, my parents doubled down on their claims about my mental state. My mother actually started crying, claiming that I was having delusions and making up stories about forged signatures. My father accused me of becoming paranoid and unstable since Grandma's death, and suggested that I needed professional help to deal with my grief. The master plan became clear when Jennifer obtained additional documents through her legal investigation. My parents intended to sell the house for $450,000, split the money 3 ways with Uncle Curtis, and relocate to a retirement community in Florida where they had already put down a deposit. They planned to have me committed to a psychiatric facility using the fake evaluation, then use their guardianship powers to access the remainder of my inheritance. Uncle Curtis' role was to serve as a character witness, supporting their claims about my mental instability. "You wasted Grandma's money on fish," my mother screamed when I confronted them with Jennifer's findings. "That money should have been saved for practical things, not thrown away on some ridiculous hobby." My father's justification was even more hurtful. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of how irresponsible you've become. We're trying to save you from yourself before you waste every penny she left you." The worst part was realizing that this betrayal had been planned from the very beginning. They hadn't supported my pond project out of love or respect for Grandma's memory. They had encouraged it because they knew it would increase the property value, making their eventual sale more profitable. Every smile, every compliment, every moment of apparent pride in my work had been a calculated performance designed to lull me into a false sense of security while they plotted behind my back. The first serious buyers were the Morrison family, a wealthy couple who had made their fortune in tech and were looking for a unique family home in our area. Sandra had scheduled their visit for a Tuesday afternoon when I was supposed to be at work, but I had grown suspicious enough of my parents' activities that I called in sick and hid in my bedroom to see what would happen. What I witnessed through my window was a carefully orchestrated performance that made my stomach turn. My parents greeted the Morrisons as if they were old friends, immediately guiding them to the backyard where they began presenting my koi pond as their own personal accomplishment. I watched my father explain the filtration system as if he had designed it himself, while my mother described the plant selection and seasonal care as though she was a master gardener. "We designed this ourselves over several years," my mother told Mrs. Morrison, while gesturing proudly at the waterfall feature. "It was quite an investment, but we wanted to create something truly special for our retirement years." My father nodded along, adding details about the months of research and careful planning that had gone into every element. The lies flowed so naturally from their mouths that I began to doubt my own memories of building the pond. Mr. Morrison was clearly impressed by what he saw, and his enthusiasm made my parents' deception even more painful to witness. "This pond easily adds $40,000 to the property value," he told his wife while examining the koi swimming below. "The craftsmanship is exceptional, and the fish alone must be worth $15,000. Finding a setup like this is incredibly rare in this price range." I couldn't stand listening to another minute of their lies, so I marched outside and interrupted their tour in the middle of my father's explanation of the pond's lighting system. "Excuse me," I announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding about who actually designed and paid for this pond." The Morrisons looked confused as I introduced myself as the actual creator and owner of the water garden they were admiring. I explained that I had used my inheritance to fund the entire project, had supervised every aspect of construction, and had personally selected each koi in the pond. My parents' faces turned red with anger and embarrassment as I systematically exposed each lie they had told during their presentation. "Brianna is going through a difficult time right now," my father quickly interjected, using the same condescending tone that was becoming familiar. She's been struggling with some mental health issues since her grandmother's death, and she sometimes has trouble distinguishing between her fantasies and reality. My mother nodded sadly, adding, "We've been trying to get her the help she needs, but she refuses to admit she has a problem." The Morrisons became visibly uncomfortable as my family's dysfunction played out in front of them. Mrs. Morrison kept looking between my parents and me, clearly trying to determine who was telling the truth. When I offered to show them the construction receipts and photos documenting the pond's creation, my parents claimed I had fabricated the documents as part of my delusions. The situation escalated dramatically when my father called the police, claiming that I was trespassing and harassing potential buyers. When Officer Rivera arrived, he was clearly confused by the domestic dispute he had walked into. My parents presented him with the forged power of attorney documents, while I showed him my identification and the property deed that listed me as a co-owner. Officer Rivera spent nearly an hour sorting through the conflicting claims and documentation before determining that this was a civil matter that would need to be resolved in court. The Morrisons left during the police interview, telling Sandra that they would look at other properties rather than get involved in our family's legal issues. Watching them drive away felt like watching my dreams disappear along with them. After the police left, my parents' threats became more explicit and terrifying. "If you keep interfering with the sale, well, have you committed within the week?" My mother hissed at me with genuine hatred in her eyes. "We have all the documentation we need to prove you're mentally unstable, and no one will believe your wild stories once you're in a psychiatric facility." That evening, I made a chilling discovery while searching my father's office more thoroughly. Hidden in his filing cabinet were brochures for several psychiatric facilities, along with admission paperwork that had already been partially filled out with my information. They had researched commitment procedures and had identified a private facility in Nevada where they could have me held for evaluation while they completed the property sale. My one ray of hope came from an unexpected source. Mike Chen, the contractor who had built my pond, called me that evening after hearing about the day's events through the neighborhood grapevine. "Brianna, I want you to know that I have all the original contracts, receipts, and photos from your pond construction," he told me. "If you need me to testify about who really paid for and designed that water garden, I'll be happy to help. What your parents are doing is wrong, and I won't let them steal credit for your beautiful creation." Mike's support reminded me that not everyone had been fooled by my parents' lies, and it gave me the strength I needed to keep fighting. But I also realized that time was running out. My parents had already scheduled tours with 2 more potential buyers, and they were clearly prepared to escalate their psychological warfare to whatever level was necessary to complete their fraud. I was running out of options to save my home and my inheritance through legal channels. My parents' next escalation was so calculated and cruel that it still takes my breath away. They orchestrated what appeared to be a legitimate mental health intervention, complete with medical professionals and concerned family members, all designed to make their false narrative about my psychological state seem credible to potential buyers and legal authorities. The setup began when my mother called our longtime family doctor, Dr. Peterson, expressing serious concerns about my mental health following Grandma's death. She described a pattern of erratic behavior, financial irresponsibility, and disconnection from reality that painted me as someone in desperate need of professional intervention. Dr. Peterson, who had known our family for 15 years and trusted my parents implicitly, agreed to come to the house for what my mother called a wellness check. When Dr. Peterson arrived the following Saturday morning, he found what appeared to be evidence of serious psychological disturbance carefully staged throughout the house. My parents had planted fake journal entries that described obsessive thoughts about fish and hearing voices from the pond. They had rearranged my bedroom to look chaotic and had even scattered empty pill bottles to suggest I was self-medicating for depression. "Your parents are genuinely concerned about your well-being," Dr. Peterson told me during what he believed was a routine health consultation. "They've shown me some troubling signs that suggest you might be struggling more than you realize. Have you been having any unusual thoughts or feelings lately?" The conversation felt surreal because I knew my parents were listening from the next room, evaluating whether their performance was convincing enough. When I tried to explain the real situation about the fraudulent property sale and forged documents, Dr. Peterson's response reflected how effectively my parents had poisoned the well. "Brianna, paranoid thoughts about family members trying to steal from you can be a sign of serious depression or even early onset mental illness. Your parents love you and want to help, but they're worried that you're not thinking clearly enough to recognize that you need support. The isolation tactics began immediately after Dr. Peterson's visit. My parents changed the locks on the house while I was at work, claiming it was for security reasons, but refusing to give me a new key. When I pointed out that I was a legal co-owner of the property, they claimed that my mental instability made it unsafe for me to have unrestricted access to the house. They also contacted my bank and convinced them to freeze my accounts temporarily while they investigated whether I was competent to manage my own finances. The social isolation was perhaps even more devastating than the financial restrictions. My parents began calling extended family members and longtime friends to warn them about my supposed mental health crisis. They used their years of credibility and my recent emotional vulnerability following Grandma's death to create a convincing narrative about my deteriorating psychological state. Cousin Ashley, who had been one of my closest confidantes since childhood, completely turned against me after a phone call from my mother. "Bree, your parents are really worried about you," she told me during what I thought would be a supportive conversation. "Maybe you should just let them handle the house sale and get yourself some professional help. The pond is beautiful, but spending $50,000 on fish does seem kind of extreme when you think about it rationally." One by one, people I had counted on for support began echoing my parents' concerns and encouraging me to listen to the people who love you most. Old friends started avoiding my calls, family members became distant, and even neighbors began looking at me with expressions of pity rather than friendship. The isolation was so complete that I began questioning my own sanity, wondering if perhaps my parents were right about my mental state. My only remaining ally was my best friend, Jessica Martinez, who had known me since college and refused to believe my parents' claims without hearing my side of the story. "This is insane, Bree," Jessica told me during one of our secret meetings at a coffee shop across town. "Your parents are literally gaslighting you and everyone around you. I've known you for 10 years, and you're one of the most mentally stable people I know. There's no way you suddenly developed serious psychological problems just because you built a pond." The legal battles were draining my remaining inheritance money at an alarming rate. My attorney, Jennifer, was excellent, but fighting a fraud case while simultaneously defending against claims of mental incompetence required extensive documentation and expert testimony that was expensive to obtain. Meanwhile, my parents continued showing the house to potential buyers, each time refining their story about their troubled daughter who needed to be protected from her own poor judgment. During this period, I discovered that my parents had scheduled a second buyer visit with the Henderson family, who were specifically interested in properties with water features for their koi collecting hobby. The irony of them wanting to buy my pond to house their own koi collection was almost too much to bear. I attempted to contact the Hendersons directly to explain the true ownership of the pond, but my parents had anticipated this move and had warned Sandra to block any calls from my phone number. Dr. Williams, a therapist who was supposedly a family friend, conducted what my parents presented as an independent psychological evaluation. This session was a masterpiece of manipulation, with Dr. Williams asking leading questions designed to elicit responses that could be interpreted as signs of mental instability. When I tried to explain the fraud scheme, he dismissed my concerns as paranoid ideation and conspiracy thinking that were consistent with depression-induced psychological disturbance. The fake therapy session was secretly recorded by my parents and later used as evidence of my need for professional treatment. They played selected excerpts for family members and potential buyers, creating an audio record that seemed to support their claims about my mental health. The violation of trust and privacy felt almost as devastating as the financial fraud they were attempting. As the second weekend approached, I realized that I was rapidly losing the legal battle despite having truth on my side. My parents' strategy of attacking my credibility while positioning themselves as concerned family members was working perfectly. They had successfully isolated me from most of my support network and had created enough doubt about my mental state that even sympathetic family members were beginning to question whether I should be making major financial decisions. The Henderson family tour was scheduled for the following Saturday, and I knew this might be my last chance to expose the truth before my parents succeeded in either selling the house or having me committed. I was running out of time, running out of money, and running out of hope that the legal system would protect me from my own family's betrayal. The third potential buyers were the Yamamoto family, a Japanese-American couple whose genuine interest in traditional Japanese garden design made my parents' appropriation of my work feel even more insulting. Mr. and Mrs. Yamamoto had specifically requested to view our property after seeing the magazine feature about the pond, and they were particularly excited about the authentic elements that reminded them of gardens from Mrs. Yamamoto's childhood in Kyoto. My parents reached a new level of manipulation by organizing what they called a family intervention the week before the Yamamoto visit. They invited every relative they could contact, including Aunt Linda, Uncle George, and Cousin Robert, supposedly to help Brianna recognize that she needs professional help. What I discovered later was that they had been calling these family members for weeks, feeding them carefully crafted stories about my deteriorating mental health and dangerous behavior. The intervention was held in our living room on a Thursday evening, and it felt like a trial where I was the defendant facing a jury that had already decided on my guilt. Aunt Linda, whom I had always considered one of my strongest supporters, opened the session by expressing her deep concern about my recent erratic behavior and poor judgment. Uncle George nodded along, adding that he was worried about my future if I continued making impulsive financial decisions. The family members took turns sharing their observations about my supposed psychological decline, all of which were based on information my parents had provided, rather than any direct interactions they had had with me. Cousin Robert, who lived in another state and hadn't seen me in over a year, somehow had detailed opinions about my obsessive relationship with the fish and my inability to accept reality about my financial situation. The most devastating moment came when they brought in Dr. Williams for what was presented as an independent professional assessment. Dr. Williams had been introduced to the family as a friend who happened to be a licensed therapist, but I later discovered that he was actually my father's golf buddy who had agreed to help with their scheme in exchange for some kind of personal favor. During the fake therapy session, Dr. Williams used every manipulative technique in the book to make me appear unstable. He asked questions like, "Do you ever feel like the fish are trying to communicate with you?" And "How often do you have thoughts about your grandmother speaking to you from beyond?" When I gave rational responses, he twisted them to suggest underlying psychological problems. Based on my professional evaluation, Dr. Williams announced to the assembled family members, "Brianna is exhibiting classic signs of what we call property obsession disorder, combined with grief-induced depression that has impaired her judgment. She genuinely believes that she is the sole creator of the pond, when in reality, this appears to be a shared family project that she has claimed ownership of due to her current psychological state." The session was secretly recorded, and I later learned that my parents planned to use the audio as evidence in commitment proceedings they were preparing to file the following Monday. The timing was deliberate. They wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent and removed from the property before the Yamamoto family visit, allowing them to complete the sale without any interference. That evening, after all the relatives had left, I overheard my parents celebrating what they believed was their final victory. I had returned to the house to collect some personal items and could hear them talking in the kitchen through an open window. "Finally, we can get rid of the fish problem and retire to Florida like we planned," my mother said with genuine relief in her voice. I never understood why she wasted her grandmother's legacy on such a stupid pond anyway. My father's response was even more hurtful because it revealed the depth of their long-term deception. "The best part is that we can use the pond to get top dollar for the house, then leave all this mess behind us. Let someone else deal with maintaining those expensive fish. We'll be sitting on a beach in Clearwater while she's getting the help she should have gotten months ago." Through additional eavesdropping, I discovered that they had already purchased a retirement home in Florida using money they had borrowed against our house, with the expectation that the sale would cover the loan and provide them with additional retirement funds. They had been planning this betrayal for at least 6 months, possibly longer, and had viewed my pond construction as an unexpected windfall that would increase their eventual profit. The most terrifying revelation was that they had scheduled a commitment hearing for Monday morning, the same day they planned to close on the house sale. If their plan succeeded, I would wake up Monday in a psychiatric facility while strangers moved into the home where I had invested my inheritance and my dreams. The paperwork was already filed, the doctors were already paid off, and the family members were already convinced that commitment was for my own good. Friday night, I realized I had less than 48 hours to save everything I had worked for. The legal system had failed me, my family had betrayed me, and the psychiatric establishment had been corrupted by my parents' lies. Traditional channels of justice were not going to protect me from this elaborate conspiracy. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. If my parents were determined to sell my pond to the Yamamoto family, I would make sure that when they arrived for their tour, there would be nothing left worth buying. If I couldn't save my creation through legal means, I would destroy it myself rather than let my parents profit from stealing it. Saturday morning, I finalized my plan for what I was already thinking of as Operation Pond Destruction. If my parents wanted to play dirty, I would show them just how ruthless their mentally unstable daughter could be when pushed beyond her breaking point. Saturday night was the longest night of my life, as I prepared for what felt like both an act of revenge and an act of mercy killing. I spent hours gathering the tools I would need, creating a timeline for maximum impact, and coordinating with Jessica to ensure I had backup support while maintaining her plausible deniability in case things went legally sideways. My plan was sophisticated enough to achieve maximum visual destruction while staying within legal boundaries that would protect me from serious criminal charges. Since I was a legal co-owner of the property and had personally funded the pond construction, I had the legal right to modify or remove my own improvements. The key was creating enough chaos to make the property unmarketable while avoiding felony-level property damage that could land me in actual legal trouble. Jessica arrived at my apartment at 5 a.m. Sunday morning with a rental truck and moral support that I desperately needed. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Bree?" she asked while helping me load sledgehammers, shovels, and drainage pumps into the vehicle. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your parents are going to be absolutely furious, and who knows how they'll retaliate. They're planning to have me committed tomorrow morning and steal everything I built with Grandma's money," I replied while double-checking my tool inventory. "If they're going to destroy my life, I'm at least going to make sure they can't profit from it. Besides, these are my fish and my pond. If anyone has the right to decide what happens to them, it's me, not the parents who forged my signature and tried to have me declared mentally incompetent." The timeline was crucial because my parents had a predictable Sunday routine that would give me exactly 4 hours to complete the destruction before they returned home. Every Sunday morning, they attended the 10 a.m. service at St. Mary's Catholic Church, followed by brunch at their favorite restaurant with their friends from the congregation. This schedule typically kept them away from the house from 9:30 until 2 p.m., providing the perfect window for my operation. Phase 1 began at exactly 10 a.m. with the most emotionally devastating part of the entire plan. I had to rescue my beloved koi before draining the pond, which meant catching each fish individually and transporting them to temporary holding tanks that Jessica had set up in her backyard. Watching Akira, Yuki, and the other fish that I had hand-selected and cared for swimming in cramped temporary containers broke my heart, but I knew this was the only way to save them from becoming casualties of my parents' greed. The actual pond destruction began with systematic dismantling of the filtration system that had cost $12,000 to install. I used bolt cutters to sever electrical connections, and sledgehammers to destroy the UV sterilizers and biological filters beyond repair. Each blow felt like I was destroying a piece of my own soul, but I channeled my anger at my parents' betrayal into every swing of the hammer. Phase 2 involved draining the pond completely and damaging the liner enough to make refilling impossible without major reconstruction. I punctured the rubber liner in multiple locations and destroyed the skimmer system that maintained water circulation. The sight of my beautiful pond reduced to an empty concrete crater filled with mud and debris was almost unbearable, but I reminded myself that this destruction was preferable to watching my parents sell my creation to unsuspecting buyers. The landscaping destruction was perhaps the most visually dramatic element of my plan. I uprooted the Japanese maples that I had carefully selected and planted, scattered the ornamental stones that formed the pond's border, and used a chainsaw to cut the teak bridge into pieces small enough to throw around the yard. By noon, the backyard looked like a construction zone that had been hit by a tornado. Throughout the morning, my parents kept sending me cheerful text messages from church and brunch, completely unaware that their retirement plans were being systematically destroyed a few miles away. "Beautiful service today, honey. Father Martinez asked about you and sends his love," my mother texted while I was using a sledgehammer to destroy the waterfall feature that had taken weeks to construct. Several neighbors came outside to watch the destruction, and I could see the shock and confusion on their faces as they witnessed me demolishing what had been featured in a magazine as one of the most beautiful gardens in the neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door tried to talk me out of continuing, asking if I was having some kind of breakdown and offering to call someone to help me. This is my pond, built with my money, on property that I co-own, I explained to the growing crowd of concerned neighbors. My parents tried to sell it without my permission using forged documents, and now they're planning to have me committed tomorrow so they can steal my inheritance. If anyone's going to destroy this pond, it's going to be me, not some stranger who buys it based on lies. The final phase involved creating maximum visual chaos for dramatic effect when my parents and the potential buyers arrived. I spread mud strategically across the patio and lawn, scattered broken pottery and stone fragments to create an obstacle course, and positioned the largest pieces of the destroyed bridge where they would be impossible to ignore. The goal was to create a scene so shocking that no rational person would consider purchasing the property. By 1 p.m., the transformation was complete. What had been a serene Japanese garden paradise just 3 hours earlier now looked like a war zone. The empty pond gaped like an open wound in the center of the yard, surrounded by uprooted plants, scattered stones, and broken pieces of what had once been my grandmother's memorial. I stood in the center of the destruction, covered in mud from head to toe, holding a sledgehammer and waiting for my parents to come home and discover what their betrayal had cost them. Jessica had left an hour earlier to establish her alibi, but not before taking dozens of photos that documented both the destruction and my legal right to modify my own property improvements. We both knew that the next few hours would determine whether my desperate gamble had saved my inheritance or simply made my legal situation worse. At exactly 2:15 p.m., I heard car doors slamming in the driveway and knew that my parents were about to receive the shock of their lives. The Yamamoto family was scheduled to arrive at 2:30, which meant they would be pulling up to witness either the final confrontation between my parents and me or the immediate aftermath of their discovery. Either way, I was confident that no one would be buying this house today. The timing was absolutely perfect in the most horrific way possible. My parents' car pulled into the driveway at exactly 2:17 p.m., and I could see through the kitchen window as they chatted happily about their post-church brunch with friends. They had no idea that their retirement dreams were lying in ruins just 50 feet away from where they sat discussing how much they were looking forward to their new life in Florida. The Yamamoto family arrived 3 minutes later, just as my parents were entering the house through the front door. I heard my mother's cheerful voice calling out, "Brianna, sweetie, we're home," followed by the sound of the Yamamoto's car doors closing as they prepared for what they believed would be a tour of an exceptional Japanese water garden. The sequence of events that followed felt like it happened in slow motion despite lasting only a few seconds. My father was the first to look out the back window, and I watched his face transform from casual contentment to absolute horror as he processed the devastation that had replaced his retirement gold mine. "What in God's name?" he whispered, before his voice rose to a roar that could probably be heard by the neighbors 3 houses away. "Brianna! What have you done?" My mother's scream when she saw the destroyed pond was so piercing that it caused the Yamamotos to stop walking up the front sidewalk and look around in concern. I was standing in the center of the muddy crater that had once been my beautiful koi pond, still holding the sledgehammer I had used to destroy the final pieces of decorative stonework, covered in mud from head to toe, but feeling strangely calm for the first time in weeks. When my parents burst through the back door with faces red from fury and disbelief, I looked directly at them and spoke in the steadiest voice I could manage. "I destroyed my pond that I built with my money on my property. If you wanted to sell someone else's work, you should have asked permission instead of forging my signature and trying to have me committed." The Yamamotos had reached the front door just in time to hear my father's next explosion of rage. "You've lost your mind! You've completely lost your mind. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined our retirement. You've destroyed everything we worked for." His face was so red that I genuinely worried he might have a heart attack, and I could see our potential buyers backing away from the front door as they realized they had walked into a family crisis. Mrs. Yamamoto was the first to speak when my parents finally noticed they had witnesses to their meltdown. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly, "we're here for the 2:30 tour, but if this is a bad time." Her husband was staring past my parents toward the backyard, and I could see his expression change from confusion to understanding as he processed the destroyed landscape that was supposed to be their dream purchase. "No, no, please don't leave," my mother practically begged while trying to compose herself. "There's been a misunderstanding. Our daughter is going through some mental health issues, and she's had a breakdown today. The pond can be rebuilt, and we can offer a significant price reduction to compensate for the temporary inconvenience." That's when I played my trump card and revealed the evidence I had been gathering for months, Mr. and Mrs. Yamamoto. I called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Before you consider buying this property, you should know that my parents forged my signature to list this house without my knowledge or consent. I am a legal co-owner of this property, and I built that pond with my own inheritance money. They have no right to sell my work without my permission." I walked toward the group while pulling out copies of the legal documents that Jennifer had helped me compile, including the original construction contracts with my name as the client, bank records showing the $50,000 payments from my inheritance account, and most importantly, the forged power of attorney documents that proved my parents' fraud. Mr. Yamamoto examined the papers I handed him with the careful attention of someone who had probably dealt with complex financial transactions in his professional life. After a few minutes of reading, he looked up at my parents with an expression of disgust that needed no translation. "These signatures are clearly forged," he told them, in a voice that carried the authority of someone who was not easily fooled. "You've been trying to sell us property that doesn't belong to you." My mother made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation by sticking to their planned narrative about my mental health. "She's been struggling with severe depression since her grandmother died. The pond became an unhealthy obsession, and she's convinced herself that she's the only one responsible for it. We've been trying to get her professional help, but she refuses to acknowledge that she has a problem." The Yamamotos exchanged a look that clearly communicated their desire to escape this family drama as quickly as possible. "We're not interested in purchasing a property with ownership disputes and legal complications," Mrs. Yamamoto announced firmly. "Well, find another house that doesn't come with this kind of baggage." They turned and walked back to their car without another word, leaving my parents standing in stunned silence as their final chance at a quick sale disappeared. At that exact moment, Jennifer arrived with the injunction papers that would legally prevent any sale of the property until the fraud case was resolved. She had been waiting around the corner for my signal that the confrontation had begun, and her timing was absolutely perfect for maximum legal impact. "Margaret and Ronald Rodriguez," Jennifer announced in her most professional voice, "you are hereby served with a temporary restraining order, preventing the sale of this property, pending resolution of fraud allegations. All listing agreements are suspended immediately, and any attempts to transfer ownership will be considered contempt of court." The legal bombshell caused my mother to finally crack under pressure and admit to at least part of their scheme. "We forged the signature because she wasn't thinking clearly," she screamed at Jennifer while waving the injunction papers. "That money was supposed to be for practical things, not wasted on fish and rocks. We were trying to protect her from her own bad judgment." My father's reaction was even more damaging to their case because he immediately began making threats that demonstrated clear criminal intent. "You've ruined our retirement, you ungrateful brat. We gave you a home, we supported you through college, and this is how you repay us? When we get out of this legal mess, well, make sure you never see another penny of inheritance money." The final moment of vindication came when Officer Rivera returned to our property, this time with a warrant for my parents' arrest on charges of fraud and forgery. Jennifer had worked with the district attorney's office to build a solid criminal case, and the evidence of forged signatures was clear enough to justify immediate charges. "Margaret and Ronald Rodriguez, you are under arrest for real estate fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit theft," Officer Rivera announced while reading them their rights. The sight of my parents being handcuffed in front of our house while standing next to the ruins of the pond they had tried to steal felt like the universe finally delivering the justice that had been denied through months of legal manipulation. As the police car drove away with my parents in the back seat, I stood alone in my destroyed backyard and felt a complex mixture of triumph and grief. I had won the battle to protect my inheritance and expose their fraud, but the victory had come at the cost of destroying the beautiful memorial I had created to honor my grandmother's memory. The question now was whether I could rebuild not just the pond, but also my life, from the ruins of this family betrayal. The immediate aftermath of my parents' arrest brought a strange sense of peace that I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I could sleep through the night without worrying about waking up to find strangers touring my backyard or legal papers declaring me mentally incompetent. The house felt different without their presence, quieter but also somehow cleaner, as if their deception had been a physical contamination that was finally being aired out. The legal proceedings moved quickly once the criminal charges were filed. With clear evidence of forged signatures and fraudulent documentation, my parents' attorney advised them to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a jury trial that could result in much harsher sentences. They ultimately pled guilty to fraud and conspiracy charges, receiving sentences of 2 years in minimum security prison, which would likely be reduced to 18 months with good behavior. The financial consequences for my parents were severe and completely of their own making. The retirement home in Florida that they had purchased using borrowed money against our house went into foreclosure when they could no longer make payments from prison. They lost their entire down payment, which had been nearly $30,000 of their life savings, and faced additional civil liability for the emotional distress and legal costs their fraud had caused me. But the most satisfying moment of legal vindication came when I discovered a provision in my grandmother's will that I had never fully understood before. Grandma Rosa had included what her attorney called an elder abuse protection clause that was triggered if anyone tried to defraud me or manipulate me into giving up the inheritance she had left. This clause automatically transferred full ownership of the family house to me if such fraud was proven in court, which meant my parents had literally lost their home by trying to steal mine. The pond restoration became a healing ritual that was even more meaningful than the original construction. This time, I wasn't building alone in secret while hiding my plans from people I thought I could trust. Jessica helped with the physical labor. Mike Chen offered his services at a significant discount because he was disgusted by what my parents had attempted, and even several neighbors volunteered their time and expertise to help rebuild what they now understood had been wrongfully attacked. The new pond design incorporated lessons I had learned from both the original construction and its destruction. The filtration system was more robust and included backup components that would prevent total failure if individual elements were damaged. The landscaping was more diverse and included native plants that would be easier to maintain long-term. Most importantly, I installed security features that would protect my investment from any future attempts at sabotage or theft. The koi had survived their temporary relocation remarkably well, and returning them to their rebuilt home felt like a resurrection of everything my parents had tried to destroy. Akira, my prized kohaku, seemed to recognize his surroundings immediately and began exploring the new features with what looked like genuine curiosity. Watching the fish swim peacefully in their restored environment reminded me that some things can survive even the most devastating betrayals. The family reconciliation process was much more complicated and emotionally challenging than the legal resolution. Aunt Linda and Uncle George contacted me several months after my parents' sentencing to apologize for believing their lies without hearing my side of the story. We should have known that Margaret and Ronald were capable of this kind of deception. Aunt Linda told me during our first conversation since the intervention, "Your grandmother always said they were too focused on money and not enough on family values." Cousin Ashley's apology was particularly meaningful because she had been the family member whose betrayal had hurt me most deeply. "I feel terrible about not supporting you when you needed it most," she told me while helping plant new flowers around the restored pond. "Your parents were so convincing about their concern for your mental health, and I thought I was helping by encouraging you to listen to them. I'll never make the assumption that parents always know what's best for their adult children again." The professional vindication came when the local Home and Garden magazine decided to do a follow-up story about the pond's destruction and restoration. The article, titled "Rising from the Ruins, A Story of Family Betrayal and Personal Resilience," became one of their most popular pieces ever, and led to several other media appearances where I could share my story and warn others about the signs of family financial fraud. My relationship with Mike Chen evolved into something deeper than a professional contractor-client arrangement during the restoration process. Working together to rebuild something beautiful from deliberate destruction created a bond that felt both romantic and spiritual. Mike understood the emotional significance of every element we were reconstructing because he had been part of the original creation, and his respect for my vision and determination made me feel valued in a way I hadn't experienced since before my parents' betrayal. The personal therapy process was essential for processing the complex trauma of being betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect and support me unconditionally. Dr. Sarah Kim, a therapist who specialized in family abuse and financial manipulation, helped me understand that my parents' behavior was part of a calculated pattern of psychological abuse that had probably been present throughout my childhood in more subtle forms. What your parents did wasn't just about money, Dr. Kim explained during one of our sessions. It was about maintaining control over you and your choices. The pond became a threat to their authority because it represented your independence and your ability to make successful decisions without their input. Destroying your credibility was their way of reasserting dominance over your life. The community support that emerged after the truth became public was overwhelming and restored my faith in human decency. Neighbors who had briefly believed my parents' lies about my mental health went out of their way to express their support and admiration for how I had fought back against their fraud. The local Japanese Cultural Center invited me to give a presentation about authentic garden design, and several landscape architecture students reached out for mentorship opportunities. My parents' eventual release from prison and their attempts at reconciliation tested every boundary I had learned to establish in therapy. They contacted me through a family law attorney, requesting a meeting to discuss rebuilding our relationship and making amends for their mistakes. Their letter included what seemed like genuine apologies and promises to respect my independence going forward, but Dr. Kim helped me recognize the continued manipulation hidden within their seemingly contrite language. The conditions I set for any future relationship with my parents were non-negotiable and designed to protect both my financial and emotional well-being. They would have to complete a certified program for financial abuse perpetrators, undergo individual therapy with a professional who specialized in family fraud cases, and agree to have no access to any of my financial information or property deeds. Most importantly, they would have to publicly acknowledge their fraud and apologize to the family members they had manipulated into supporting their lies. As I write this story, it's been 2 years since the confrontation that saved my inheritance and exposed my parents' betrayal. The pond is more beautiful than ever, featuring new species of koi that represent the different stages of my healing journey. The property value has increased significantly, not just because of the water garden, but because of the additional security features and landscaping improvements that the insurance settlement allowed me to install. The final evening scene that has become my favorite part of each day involves sitting on the rebuilt bridge at sunset, watching Akira and the other koi swimming peacefully below, while reflecting on how destroying something I loved became the only way to save it from being stolen by people who had never understood its true value. Grandma Rosa would be proud of my fighting spirit and the beautiful legacy that survived multiple attempts at destruction. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that sometimes protecting what matters most requires courage to take actions that feel destructive in the moment, but are actually acts of preservation. My parents taught me that family relationships based on lies and manipulation are worth destroying to make room for authentic connections built on truth and respect. And most importantly, I learned that I have the strength to rebuild anything that truly belongs to me, no matter how completely others try to destroy it. So here's my question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to fight back against people who claim to love you but were actually trying to control or steal from you? How did you find the courage to stand up for yourself when everyone around you was telling you to trust the very people who were betraying you? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I know I am not the only person who has faced this kind of family manipulation, and we can all learn from each other's experiences of survival and recovery. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it who might be going through similar situations. Subscribe to my channel because I'll be sharing more stories about overcoming family abuse and financial manipulation, and don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to fight back against people who underestimate your strength and determination. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your inheritance, your dreams, and your peace of mind are worth fighting for, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. I wish all of you the wisdom to recognize deception before it destroys your life, the courage to fight back when fighting becomes necessary, and the resilience to rebuild something even more beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let people who claim to care about you steal the future you've worked so hard to create.